It's a little overwhelming for an administrator or a facilities manager to say, okay, now I'm going to implement sustainability in our institution. Well, what does that mean? This is the founder of Natural Capitalism Solutions, Hunter Lovins, in Colorado. This is her favorite office on the back of her horse. She's doing email here on the way to the county parks department to talk about sustainable agriculture in Colorado. And Hunter's fond of saying the science around all kinds of sustainability, but particularly climate change, is uncertain. This is her favorite measure regarding climate change. This is ladies' undergarments for the last 100 years. And we've concluded that the science around climate change doesn't really matter. Let's assume that climate skeptics, just as an example of why we're so concerned about sustainability, let's just assume that all the skeptics are right. Climate change is hooey. It doesn't matter. If you believe in it, you also probably believe in UFOs and the leprechauns and things like that. But if all you care about is your institution's budget, you'll do exactly the same things that you would do if you were scared to death about climate chaos. And that's true about many things having to do with sustainability. And so the American Correctional Association approached this from the question of, well, is there a money motivation here? Is there money on the table? Can we save money? Can we increase revenue? Is it going to affect our budgets? And what they found was yes. And so they adopted a standard that says that any program in a correctional institution should demonstrate that it has examined within the audit cycle, when an institution gets audited, and where appropriate and feasible, implemented strategies that include recycling, energy and water conservation, pollution reduction, utilization of renewable energy alternatives. It goes on to offer some comments. Correctional facilities and programs have the responsibility to implement strategies that allow correctional facilities to be managed in ways that are most cost-effective and deliver superior performance while improving environmental responsibility and sustainability. So almost every institution is doing something, and almost every state is doing something. So what's everything? What if we wanted to do everything? What would that include? So this would include recycling, pollution reduction, utilization of renewable energy alternatives, etc. The ACA went further than that, though. They've adopted a policy, which is a statement of what they think is important, to say that the American Correctional Association fully supports appropriate short and long-term, cost-effective facilities and materials management strategies that are resource sufficient and environmentally responsible. The key word in there is cost-effective. We wanted to have an opening big enough to drive an institution through. So it's not that you have to do this because it's the right thing to do. You do it when it's cost-effective. And the audit criterion simply says the institution should examine whether or not it's cost-effective and what can be done. Here's my buddy Donna at the Boulder County Jail. She's looking down at breakfast. And the Boulder County Jail had a unique opportunity a few years back. They were able to send inmates out to the county recycling center to work, and the money that they were paid went into a fund which the jail used for sustainability-oriented programs. So they used it to build these two giant augers on their back stoop behind the jail. These are where Donna puts breakfast, is in those two big bins up there. And then there's an electric auger which turns the compost for them, and over the period of about a month, it turns it into good soil, which they put out into the garden, which is adjacent to the jail. They grow all the vegetables that are eaten by the 400 inmates in the jail all summer, and they give the excess to the local food bank. And for a while, they were entering the county fair, but they won so many blue ribbons that the county fair asked them please to stop entering because they didn't think it was fair. And the Boulder County Jail is a good example of an institution that's tried to do everything. We'll come back to them in a little while, but what are the 7 easy steps that institutions can do? And folks out in California, you know that many of these things are happening there already, and many of the institutions here in the room have done these, but these are the 7 steps that we've identified just as entry points for an institution that wants to start implementing sustainability. And they are, first of all, integrating technology and people. The people are really what makes it work. It's not just about technology. Just as with correctional technologies, it's not just about nightsticks and rubber bullets and razor wire. It's about who's using it and how are they implementing it. And so we'll talk about that more in a minute. But second, lighting, then HVAC, which includes the building envelope and everything having to do with heating and cooling a building, plug-in appliances, motors and pumps, anything that plugs into the wall or is wired into the wall and uses electricity. Materials flow, and this is a huge area that most institutions have seized on right away because recycling is such a banner for everybody, but it has to do with everything going into the institution, everything going out of the institution. So that includes your cleaning compounds, your paints and finishes, floor stripping compounds, any kind of chemicals, and all the food, all the office supplies, all the bedding, every kind of physical thing that goes in and out of the institution is an opportunity to save money and increase efficiency, reduce toxicity, and increase safety. And then water and sewage treatment is always an issue, whether it's on-site or not. And lastly, all the rest of the energy besides HVAC and lighting that includes transportation. And the first thing any institution encounters when addressing any of these areas is funding considerations. So this is a time of limited funds. Almost nobody has money knocking around looking for something to spend it on. So we have to do maintenance items first. And inmates can be trained to do a lot of the maintenance items, and they can be trained as job training. And simple things can be done without a cost factor. In Indiana, their recycling program started by putting out 3 trash cans. Didn't cost them anything to do it. First year they saved $140,000 on their trash bill at Putnamville. So for little or no cost, there are a lot of things that can be done. I don't know if correctional institutions have similar situations, but if you have any warehouses, at Natural Capitalism we went into a warehouse that was not a correctional warehouse, but it was a technology warehouse, one of these big facilities with 30-foot high ceilings. They had lights shining down on the top of the boxes. So it was like, you know, big crates that were scared of the dark or something. We said, have you got a switch? Can you install a dimmer? You know, get lighting down to security levels instead of full lighting? They said, oh, sure. They saved $6,000 a month. So little things can be done. Prioritize those. Then consider third-party financing that doesn't use your institution's money. Energy service companies are all around. I can provide you with lists from some of the states that give examples of energy service companies that will come in and put up the money, do the work for you first, and allow you to have a pay-for-performance contract that pays them back out of the savings that are achieved. One of my favorite questions is, can you leverage inmate welfare funds? Have you got funds parked in a fund? We'll talk in a minute about what that might be. And then lastly, it's very important that at the institutional level and the state level, you evaluate your choices on life cycle costs, not upfront costs. What's it going to cost over the term that this piece of equipment or this technology or this practice is going into place, not just what does it cost us up front. And the one example that everybody understands is inkjet printers. You buy a computer system, they give you an inkjet printer. They usually give it to you. You know, you pay $50, $75 for an inkjet printer. What they don't tell you is that the ink cartridges cost $15 a piece, and if it's or $18 a piece, and if it's a color printer, you might have 4 or 5 or 6 of them to go out every time you run a color print run. And over the life cycle of that printer, you might spend $2,000 or $3,000 or more on ink for your free printer. Whereas if you priced out what is a more efficient printer cost that uses less ink, it might be $200 or $300, $400 up front, but over the lifetime of the printer, you might only spend $700 or $1,000 on ink. So almost everything you do, light bulbs, water treatment, vehicles, can be analyzed on a similar life cycle cost. Solar panels is another great example of how much do you save over the lifetime of the solar panel rather than what does it cost you to do it up front. And let's use an example of utility cost projections. It's very hard to get any kind of statistics on how much your institution's saving. And so we did a hypothetical projection a couple of years ago in Colorado because utility estimates are usually understated and we don't know about what's happening with national energy, general state and economy corrections budgets just are uncertain, but let's just make some projections. If we imagine this facility, my co-author of the NIJ guidebook, Gene Atherton, did a survey of I think it was 11 or 12 states that he talked with, just to kind of find out what was happening with utility costs and how much they were spending on energy and water and waste disposal. And so we averaged that out and masked the data to say, okay, let's take an imaginary institution that has 1,200 beds, medium custody, constructed within the last 20 years. The average estimate for utilities in 2009 would be about $1.1 million. If we assume conservatively that those utility prices were going to increase 5% over the next 20 years, which is, I don't know about your utility bills at home, but mine have been going up by more than that. By 2030, that same institution is going to be paying $2,984,000 for their utilities. That's a 265% increase over 20 years. It's a $1.8 million increase, and that's not the sort of thing that legislatures just sort of say, oh, sure, you can have an extra $1.8 million a year. It's difficult to do. Now, there's some wild cards that we haven't really thought about, and that is if EPA or the Congress require carbon controls, that could easily bump up utility prices by 5%. So if we look at this 1.1 million as conservative and then say maybe a 10% increase per year, which is also not out of the question, we could be looking at $6 million a year in extra utility costs for energy, water, and waste, which is definitely going to be staff positions by comparison. And just for comparison purposes, we looked at actual rates in Colorado from 2002 through 2009, and then the utility, Xcel Energy provides electricity for Colorado. We looked at their projections for what electricity is going to cost over the next 20 years. They're projecting a huge increase by 2030 because of the cost of coal and natural gas going up. So we'll see what happens with utility costs. But conversely, what if your institution were able to save through sustainability-oriented practices? Suppose you were able to reduce your costs by 5%, which then repeats year after year. You can do that with just turning off switches and turning off monitors on computers and putting flow-restricting shower heads in the bathrooms. That avoids that $1.8 million increase, and over 20 years, it's going to save you like $1,500 per inmate. It's like $50 per inmate per month. It's a lot of money in there. Where does that come from? If you've got access to any kind of capital, whether it's your inmate welfare funds or your third-party financiers or your capital reserve fund. These are the scientists out at Lawrence Berkeley Labs in California analyzed comparative investments looking at fluorescent lights, replacing out incandescent lights, clothes washers, water heaters, programmable thermostats, duct sealing, all different kinds of stuff. You notice the return on investment they're getting here? 40% for lights and duct sealing. For a long-term investment for a 301k plan, I don't know if your 401k is still the same it was, but I call mine my 301k now because the hasn't been so good. But you know any funds that are earning 40% per year? Even the worst investments, you know, if you work on the expensive things like windows and increased wall and attic insulation, they're paying around 7–8%. So if you compare to where your money is parked, investing in sustainability-oriented practices is probably the best place you can invest any kind of capital. And this personalizes it. If we looked at different types of investments, what would happen if you just bought one at your house? What would you be getting on your investment? Pretty big numbers there. So it's pretty difficult to argue against doing sustainability-oriented practices just on a money basis. So what are we talking about in these 7 areas? Integrating technology and people. We're talking about increased health for staff and inmates from reduced toxics, reduced medical care costs, increasing job satisfaction, employing inmates in money-saving activities, which also teach job skills. In lighting, we're talking about indoor lighting replacement, outdoor lighting replacement. We'll talk about specifics in just a minute. For HVAC, we're looking at walls and attics, plugging leaks, conducting periodic maintenance and tune-ups, especially on furnaces and boilers. Those are often neglected. One of the big problems with HVAC systems is institutions invest in these high, fancy, computerized systems, and then they don't invest in making sure that people know how to service them and take care of them, so they end up going back to doing it manually. Variable air valve systems where you get your zone valves in local places, and multi-zone valve heating and cooling systems, upgrading heating, ventilation, air conditioning. I'm going to make sure, by the way, that the SPP folks have this presentation available so you don't have to take notes on all this. Life cycle assessments, as we talked before, and also heat islands. If you've got a lot of black parking lots around or black roofs that create heat, that can increase your cooling bill in the summer in particular. Plug-in appliances includes motors, so here we're talking about replacing older and inefficient refrigerators and freezers. How about unplugging the drink vending machines in your visitor room? Why should those be running all night and having all those lights on them all night and all the times that you're not open? Investigating incentive programs for replacing inefficient inmate TVs. We ran some interesting calculations on inmate TVs a few years ago. How about prison industry? You got industry in there that's using pumps and motors and lathes and electric equipment, and is the institution paying for that? Might be worth looking at how efficient those could be. And then on materials and toxics, we're talking about improving and upgrading recycling programs, investigating composting of food wastes, uses of compostable materials. These are all the things that we've heard about in here, organic farms and gardens. And then you can recycle and repair everything, bicycles, wood, cardboard, metal. We had a huge pallet at the Putnamville facility in Indiana we saw last year that they were recycling fire extinguishers. So just anything that goes into the garbage can practically either be recycled or composted. And then with regard to water, efficient flow, appliances, there's some very good companies that are doing this and offering upfront financing. Waterless urinals is a mixed bag. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Depends on how well the people maintaining them are educated, and they're really easy to sabotage. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Some institutions have had great results. Other institutions have had difficult results. Rainwater, capturing rainwater works in areas where water is scarce. We'll talk about that in a little while. And rain gardens and soft curbs, these are swales that collect rain and allow it to percolate into the water. Green roofs we'll also talk about in a minute, and watching out for water runoff from parking lots. And then lastly, energy and transportation. I saw a great photograph earlier on one of the poster boards of solar-powered carports and parking lots, and especially getting ready for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and being able to gather that. So all these sexy energy stuff, solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, biofuels. A lot of people don't know about low rolling resistance tires for fleet vehicles. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then all the distance learning and remote viewing and electronic visiting that we can do. So these are the 7 easy steps that we're going to talk about. And what I want to do now is do a whirlwind tour of examples of what's being done. And some of you have seen some of these before. Some of them include institutions like the folks out in California and Washington that are on the electronic link here. But when we talk about integrating technology and people, this has been mentioned several times this week, it's the green team. It's starting out by gathering together a group of people who are available for an occasional meeting to brainstorm and get people at every level. Get line officers, get custody staff, get administrators. It's very important that the green team be kicked off by the person with highest authority and celebrity that you can get into the room to give their blessing to the process so that everybody knows that it's important. And then also involve community people, like in California we have Planting Justice and the Insight Garden program at San Quentin, and various foundations have participated in different institutions up in Washington. There are a number of well-known community groups. The Ohio Prison Project is here. That was started by the Vera Institute of Justice. A community group came into the prison. Getting those people involved in the green team can be a great resource. And by doing that, you can get innovative projects such as the beautification of visitor spaces or horticulture projects. San Francisco County Jail is one of my favorite institutions because they had a banner on their jail quite a few years back that said, "How do you get a 38-year-old man to stop beating his spouse?" And then underneath in fine print it said, "Talk to him when he's 16." It's a far-sighted institution, and they look at things like, how do we engage people that are going to be going back into the community? What kind of skills do we give them? Cook County Jail copied the San Francisco project to get a garden going out there. In Chino, California, I particularly like this program because at Chino they got outside funding from Mountain Dew and Strauss Foundation that paid for the implementation of their composting and garden system. And these are things that really increase the image of the institution in the community when you can get these other people involved. So that's a little bit about technology and people and getting them going. With regard to lighting, a lot of people still talking about LEDs, solid state lighting. It's coming up fast. It's almost reached cost parity in most uses, except pole lights. It's very hard to get LEDs to spread their light across a wide distance outside, so I'd be a little leery about that. But in almost all other uses, LEDs are working really well. Keynow is just one example of a company that does LED lights specifically for correctional institutions. Here's a food market in Longmont, Colorado. You notice these fluorescent tubes up here? Those are actually not fluorescent tubes, those are LED light strings. And so they're cost effective, they're competitive with fluorescents. They use about 10% of the electricity, and they pay back in anywhere from 1.5 to 3 years, and they last 10 years or longer. Quality control is an issue with LEDs, so be careful. You don't want them made in China. They do have, we have a number of manufacturers in the United States, Albio in Colorado. What's the name of the LED manufacturer in North Carolina? Cree, C-R-E-E. Clean Light, Green Light's another one that came out of Europe and is active here. So there's just a huge volatile market on solid state lighting that can save a lot of costs on lighting. And lots of other lighting technologies around, lots of consultants who can advise you. Magnetic induction lighting, for example, can save a lot of money on fluorescence. And if you're going to fluorescence, the smaller the tube, the more efficient it's likely to be. And if you have any incandescence anywhere in your institution, it's a money sump. Incandescent light bulbs are actually little heaters that happen to put out a little bit of light. And if you're using them to heat your building in the winter, that's great, but they're really not designed to produce light. Lots of better ways to do it. HVAC is a very big expense for most institutions with tremendous opportunities for saving. Best example I know is Bridgewater Correctional Complex up in Massachusetts. They did a complete complex-wide energy management and control system that included a combined heat and power boiler which generates electricity from the waste heat from the boiler and also heats water. And they figure they're going to save $27 million over the life of the system. Boulder County Jail in Colorado, this is the worst slide I have in this presentation. Up on the roof here, there's a little thing called an air pair that looks like a beehive or a wasp's nest. It circulates the air in their day room where you've got a ceiling that's 20 feet high. All the heat gathers at the top. And this is like a miniature jet engine that is very inexpensive to purchase, and it circulates the air in the room, reduced heating and cooling costs by 40%. It depends on the size of the room and the size of the engine. They're, you know, $20 to $200, depending on 20 to 200, yeah. No, these are cheap. You just hang them from the ceiling.
They're comparable to a ceiling fan.
Yeah, they're a focused ceiling fan. They just create a column of air that blows the air down from the top down into the area where the people are, and so it circulates the heat and cooling. What's that? Very simple. Any electrician can do it. They're a wonderful opportunity. And I don't mean to plug AirPair. It just happens to be the example that I knew. But I'm sure there are other technologies at local area just that get these heat columns going. Out in California, in the State Resources Building, they did this where they have a 3 or 4 story atrium. And they just put some big tubes, cylinders of fabric in the corners of the room that are 40 feet high. And because they're so high, the hot air at the top sucks the cold air in from the bottom, and it goes out the top, and it creates a convection in the building, and that also reduces. So just getting air circulating in large spaces is a really cheap way to save money. Talking about materials flow, talking about plug-in appliances, the only word you need to know if you haven't invested a lot of money in this yet is Energy Star. The U.S. government produces a certification program that picks the top 25% of energy-efficient technologies with everything from refrigerators to television sets to furnaces to windows. And if you look for the Energy Star logo, they've already vetted these for life cycle operating costs, and it'll save up to 25% on your energy bills. You can get a lot more efficient than that. There's a website called Top 10 that lists the top 10%. But just looking at the life cycle cost for anything that uses electricity is another easy way. When you get to the life cycle turnover of those appliances, if you buy new anything, you'll save money. And depending on the appliance, things like vending machines, if they've been in there for 5 or 10 or 15 years, a lot of times it's cost effective to replace them now. You don't have to wait for them to run out. If you look at the life cycle versus the operating costs, sometimes you're spending more on the equipment than it costs to replace it. And there are a number of engineering companies that will come in and do those analyses for you. And they'll look at complex things like if you have a steam heat system or a heat system that operates on circulating mineral oil or something like that. Duct tape and making curved pipe connections and things like that can really save you a lot of money. Also, any kind of variable speed motor and pump. And so this is one example from a company called Emerson Engineering that'll come in and look at your whole institution, and they just identify everything all over the institution that's an engineering technology that can save you money. And it's always worth it. Even when those companies charge up front for this kind of an analysis, it's almost always worth it just for the ideas, even if you don't implement everything they say. And most companies will deduct the cost of their assessment if you select them for your purveyor, or you can do it on an RFP basis. We'll take questions at the end, by the way. I know I'm screaming through this. When we talk about materials flow, it's such a broad area that I'm just going to skate across the surface because there's been a lot of talk about it. Recycling is a gimme, a lot of attention on organic gardens and composting. These are all fairly easy and inexpensive things to set up. If you look at Aberdeen, Stafford Creek's one of the leaders in the country. Hi, Washington, if you're still on the line. They're doing wonderful things out there with recycling everything, composting, growing vegetables, and getting some good statistics on how much they're able to save out of doing these projects, many of which have links to the community by being able to send recycled materials and refurbished items out into the community. All over Washington, they've done these kinds of things, and everything from honey and beekeeping to growing vegetables to recycling not only for the institution but for the surrounding community. And once institutions invest in these composting facilities, they can either cycle their own waste or they can go and do it for the community. And this is the most legible slide in this presentation. I'm sure you can all read this, but this is taken from the Sustainability in Prisons Project website. Is it still up on that website, or is it? It's a wonderful comprehensive summary of the things that have been done at Cedar Creek. Yakult has another great composting operation at their Larch Correction Center. Huge reductions in garbage bills, lots of food recycled. Walla Walla. I love Walla Walla because Walla Walla, you can grow wheat around Walla Walla, even not just onions, but I get stuck on my Walla weaving. And there are lots of ways to compost. These are hedgerows. They do this in Indiana too, where you just row things out and then it can be covered in some. I don't think I know of a correctional institution that's capturing methane from these composting hedgerows, but there are some private facilities that will do that and some companies that will come in and set up these composting operations and also capture the methane so that it can be used for cooking or for heating the facility. So big dollars here, yearly savings in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And these programs have been going on long enough that we know that they're reliable. So on a smaller scale, even Rikers Island is doing a composting and horticulture program that's showcased in their visiting area. So you can do all of this as vocational training, and some of them get good private funding for doing some of these high-profile examples. North Carolina's recycling correctional materials. They also have good vermiculture programs. Yeah, Bill, you're still here from Maryland. We talked earlier today about the savings in decommissioning buildings and recycling construction materials. If you're going to tear down a building, really look at decommissioning it and recycling because it can save millions of dollars. And once again, inmate job training. Down in Mississippi, growing a lot of food. They were spending $3 million, cost them $3 million, almost exactly the same amount to grow their own food. And meanwhile, they're employing inmates for hundreds of thousands of hours and growing lots of good, healthy food for themselves and for distribution. Here's my favorite biofueled vehicle in the country, Angola, out at the farm, still using the same biofueled vehicle that they've been using for 100 years. Gets the inmates out to the field and back, gets all the produce in and out. They're also doing horticulture, and don't forget your office equipment. You can recycle all those printer toner cartridges, use post-consumer recycled paper. How about cleaning compounds? Any kind of chemicals that you're using in your institution, if you've got anything caustic, it's a hazard to your staff. A lot of states have required not to use that anymore, but just remember that any kind of cleaning compounds, finishes, paints, solvents, floor strippers. Those are dangerous to your staff and to the inmates. So if you can get the toxics out, there are a number of companies. Portion Pack is one of the leaders. That they have a line of products called Correct Pack. Spartan Chemical also has a line. What's the Eco Lab? Has some correctional things. One clue that I always use is if the system has a lock on the cabinet, it's probably not the best system. Because the safe stuff, you don't have to lock it up because it's not dangerous. Closing in here, water. Rain barrels, I haven't seen an analysis that shows that rain barrels actually save money, but they do save water. So if you're in an area that's importing water from other areas, it might be worthwhile looking at collecting the water and putting it into your landscape watering. I like drainage swales, rain gardens. A number of correctional institutions have put on green roofs. Even some of the federal institutions are doing that. Obvious security issues around having inmates mowing the lawn on the roof has to be planned out carefully, but a number of correctional institutions are doing it. Makes the roof better insulated, and it saves money on the overall roofing material. So that's a design feature that a lot of architects are including now in correctional institutions. Aquaponics is a huge area. The folks in LA County at Pitchess are looking at doing aquaponics. Planting Justice is putting in a demonstration program outside the institution, but to employ formerly incarcerated people. And aquaponics is just, you have a hydroponics garden on top of a fish tank. So you're growing fish underneath, you're growing vegetables on top. Very productive way of producing a lot of food in a very small space without too much investment up front. There are a number of companies that are offering systems that can be purchased, and we're waiting for a correctional institution to demonstrate what the numbers are because we don't have any examples yet. Also, another way of saving water, if you're using ecologically responsible cleaning compounds, a lot of them come in concentrated form so that you don't have to be trucking 40 or 50-gallon drums of cleaning compounds around. You just truck little packets and mix it with water on site. It's a great way to save water as well as be more environmentally responsible. On the energy side, we've already touched on lots of things that can be done with the heating systems. In Indiana, they're using biomass boilers. At Putnamville, they have a pallet refurbishing operation. So they take wooden pallets where the lead boards are broken up and they tear them off and replace them and refurbish the pallets and send them out. They had been landfilling all the wood waste. They figured out for the cost of a chipper, they can start chipping that wood waste and upgrade their boiler to be able to take wood chips, and saved a lot of money, heat the institution for most of the year using their recycled wood chips. Up in Illinois, they're recycling all their cooking oil and using it to fuel some of their vehicles, looking for ways to commercialize that. Out in California, hi California, for those of you who are on the phone. Of course, California is solar heaven, along with Colorado and New Mexico and Arizona. One of my favorite statistics nationally is we could provide all the electricity that the United States needs on 93 square miles of solar panels out in the desert. So it's a huge untapped resource. All the roofs in the country could be generating electricity. That solar desert, the place where there's no solar energy, Germany, leading the world, putting in solar energy along all their freeways, on all their rooftops. They're targeting having 50% or more of their electricity coming from renewable sources. And California correctional institutions are also leading by installing solar panels every place they can to collect energy. And the payback period is long, 12 to 15 years. The upfront investment is pretty high. You need a private partner to put in the capital investment to get these facilities going, but then they work. You get a solar-powered carport, it just sits there and generates electricity, the cost doesn't go up. It's a great investment. Lastly, lots of electronic means for increasing communication, video visiting, video conferencing, cuts down on the transportation of your inmates and your staff. Some institutions are doing video court appearances, video hearings, so that you don't have to be transporting these people all around, burning diesel and using up staff time. Washington has some wonderful statistics on electronic communications between incarcerated parents and their kids. Kids won't read a letter, they won't write back, But if you get an email system that's properly monitored and restricted so that it's secure and allow parents to communicate with their kids via electronic means, Washington has good statistics on reductions on inmate violence, reductions on inmate on staff violence, reductions in administrative write-ups, just by the simple fact of putting parents in touch with their kids via email. So lots of good things there.
We actually have in Utah, we call it telemedicine, and we have several clinics at University.
Oh, that's great. So for the folks online electronically, we're talking about Utah has electronic medical consultations now.
We also have a CAT scan machine in the trailer at the prison, so inmates get their CAT scans and MRIs.
Aha. And a portable CAT scan MRI machine that goes around to the institutions.
Also, ICE has
Hang on just a minute. Let me get you a microphone. What happened to those two microphones that were up here? The California folks can't hear. We had two microphones up here that went away. Okay, if you could give Steve a mic.
Anyway, we have ICE that's come in and put in a big video. It's about, no, it's not a very
Immigrations
big room.
and Customs
Yeah,
Enforcement.
and
right?
they talk to us once a week from Washington, D.C., and they interview their inmates, the ICE inmates that are incarcerated in Utah, which saves a ton.
And they do it electronically? Or
Electronically.
Yeah, well,
Yep.
wonderful examples. So just to finish up here, in addition to all these one-off, where do you start, what can you do, there are a number of institutions that are trying to do it all at once. And it's actually very cost-effective to do that, because when you do everything at once, you can take the high-value, high-savings items like lighting and combine the savings for that with the expensive things like replacing your laundry equipment or putting new windows in or getting insulation in the walls or the attic. And so when you do it all together, all the savings combine and you get to do it all at once. Whereas if you just do the high savings things first, you suck off that savings, and then when you get to the expensive things, it's not always as cost effective to do it. So those environmental radicals, out in that eco-fascist country in Kansas, did it all at once and ended up saving a whole bunch of money. And the return on investment they got was 12.2%. I don't know who's getting that on their 301k plan, but it seems like a pretty good investment to me. Oregon, of course, leading the country, along with Washington, on doing integrated community planning. And I was very impressed to hear the folks from Pitchess talking about having their institution be a sustainable community, beginning to think of the fact that we've got 8,000 people living here, we've got 1,000 or 2,000 staff coming in and out. It's bigger than a lot of towns. We might as well treat these as sustainable communities where people come in for a while, they learn responsible living, then they go back out into the community with something to share. Boulder County Jail that I mentioned earlier was doing everything. They did everything they could find. The county mandated a lot of it, but they just kind of took the lead and said, okay, let's see how much we can do. And they ended up with a 3-year payback on some very elaborate technologies that they did. Federal Bureau of Prisons, I'm not going to go over all this detail, but this will be in the slideshow if you want to download it from the website. They're leading with institutions that by 2030 are supposed to be zero waste, zero net energy, zero net impact on water, and humane, compassionate institutions at the same time. So they've got huge lists of things that they're just putting into all their designs for their new facilities that can overwhelm everybody. MTC is headed, the Management Training Corporation is headquartered here in Utah. I always like to cite them when I get close. They were a private operator that started out as Job Corps, and now they're doing corrections. They're operating 22 facilities with 29,000 inmates, and they've got some great success examples. They set out to reduce their electricity use by 10%, ended up doing 19%. Wanted to reduce paper use by 25%, ended up doing 30%. It's not that hard. So you can just set your goals. Best resource we know is ours, the NIJ Greening Corrections Technology Guidebook. Another great resource is that NIC produced Greening Corrections. Both of these are available for download off the internet for free. And I'm not so worried about putting the fear of God into administrators. I think we should really be putting the fear of China into our whole economic planning system. Here's a 6.7 megawatt electrical generating system on top of a stadium in China. They had a similar system on top of their train station. We need to be not only cost competitive, but jobs competitive. We need to be turning people out of our institutions who know how to qualify for the jobs of the future. And if we don't, then we're going to continue seeing our jobs go overseas. And those of you who saw us in Seattle last September know about the principles of natural capitalism, which we call the principles of sustainability. That's buy time by saving money and radically increasing resource productivity. Not because efficiency is the answer. You cannot improve efficiency forever. But it does buy us time to come up with technologies that are more responsible and mimicked on the way nature does business. If we design for sustainability, we use biomimicry. How does nature do it? Closed loops, no waste, no toxicity, everything done at standard ambient temperature and pressure. And last of all, manage for the restoration of human and natural capital. Take care of the people as well as the resources. Because it's not true that the second mouse gets the cheese. We need to be like this little guy, strap on a helmet and go for it.
We're gonna move through this quickly. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I don't want to, for those of you who might have questions, just talk to you real quickly about the origin of green prisons and where we came from and what we're trying to do with this. The source of green prisons, let me go deal with that first. ACA established the Clean and Green Committee in January of 2010. That was ACA's first real step forward into the whole business of sustainability and whatnot. Paul was a big part of that initial group, and there were a couple of state commissioners, John Reese and Richard Stalder from Kentucky and Louisiana, are former commissioners, that really pushed this point within ACA and with the Board of Governors and really drove home the message that this is something that we need to be looking at as a profession and as a discipline. So ACA formed the committee in January of 2010. We've now had 6 meetings of that, but the original charge from the president was to promote sustainability and to correctional administrators to talk about it. Back to Paul's point about, you don't have to do anything, but reasonable people given positive options will tend to choose them. And so the notion was to just make folks aware of the opportunities and the advantages to looking at sustainability. Where possible, to identify best practices, to help promote green-collar jobs for offenders. The notions that while there may not be a ton of jobs, green-collar and environmentally related jobs in the community now, those job opportunities are growing exponentially, and we needed to help prepare the correctional workforce for that. To help improve and ensure the use of our safety and security throughout the institution by the use of green chemicals to minimize and eliminate where possible the kinds of chemicals that could be weaponized. As Paul mentioned, and those of you that are involved in the accreditation process know, the presence of toxic caustics and flammables can be a major challenge for those of us in the institution. We put such a high priority on sanitation, and many wardens and superintendents are in some ways, if not formally, certainly informally evaluated on how well they manage their facility by how clean it is. So there's a lot of emphasis on that, which tends to flow downhill, which encourages folks to, on occasion, bring chemicals and other kinds of things into the institution to do cleaning with that really have no place in that environment. So to as much as possible, the elimination of those kinds of chemicals. And finally, to identify financial incentives related to sustainable practices. So when we had the first meeting of this, and I'll be up front, and I mentioned it this morning, I'm not an environmentalist, I'm not a scientist, I'm a correctional practitioner. And my thought was, oh golly gee whiz, I'll go do this as a favor to the guys who asked me to do it, check that box on the resume and move on. and what I found was that this is an extremely, I think, positive move for our profession. I think it opens up lots of opportunities. For that reason, I went home and established Green Prisons, which began as a website, and I never frankly saw it evolving as much more than that. But there was a clear need, as I said in that first meeting and have done subsequent meetings around the country. There's a lot of stuff going on out there, but there was no real vehicle to share that information. Certainly what the SPP is doing now and where they're going with their initiatives as well. There's a clear need to share the results and the positive things that folks are doing so that we don't go around and reinvent the wheel on a regular basis. I'm going to move through the policy statement. Paul really talked on that. Want to talk just again briefly about his publication, or the one that he and Gene wrote. We felt like this was such an important document that it needed to be shared with the larger correctional community. So NIJ wasn't prepared to print hard copy, but we felt particularly for the folks we wanted to get it in the hands of, the chances that if they had a hard copy that they could sit down, look at, go through back and forth from time to time, whatever, it'd stand a better chance of getting read than expecting some commissioner to sit at their desk and page through a 60-page PDF. So we went along with the North American Association of Wardens and Superintendents, partnered with Correctional Industries in Indiana, and printed enough copies of this document so that we could send one to every commissioner in the country. And we did that about a year ago, just to make sure that everybody got a copy of this document and would have, as Paul points out, this blueprint, the 7 steps, and begin to take a look, so agencies would at least be stimulated to take a look at what could happen if they were so inclined to do so. And that's, as we see it, one of the major roles for Green Prisons, is to find information like this and to make sure it gets the widest distribution. We're a nonprofit company in Kentucky, and basically we want to be able to provide information about what's going on out in the field to other practitioners around the country, and also to share with commercial vendors the scope of the corrections market. One of the things that we've found is that a lot the whole sustainability movement is bringing a lot of new vendors into the correctional marketplace, but they don't know how to. Frequently, they don't know how to reach out to us. They don't know how to penetrate the market. They don't know how to let people know what their product is about. Many of them have never dealt with government and the whole procurement process before. The procurement process itself has become ever increasingly more strident in terms of making sure that there's no bias and those kinds of things. So we really wanted to help educate vendors to how the best ways were to get to this population, and to help practitioners understand that there are new technologies, new products coming along all the time that they can take advantage of if they know they're out there, and not make assumptions about what's out there and what it'll do based on previous experience. So we've begun with over the past 18 months or so, we now do a regular newsletter. We produce webinars on a fairly regular basis. We've got another one coming up on Thursday, a week from today, that you're encouraged to register for. It's free, but it gives you a chance to touch base with some of the more cutting-edge pieces. The one we're going to do next week is on establishing an agency-wide strategic plan. Jenny Hildebrand from Ohio here, and also Jen Aholt, the sustainability coordinator, and also the CEO of Correctional Industries in Illinois will be the 2 featured speakers for that. And like I said, again, it's free. You can go to greenprisons.org and register for that. We've still got about 30 or 40 slots left. We have done 2 symposiums so far. We'll do another one in 2014. I've got a copy of the agenda from the last one. If you're interested in that, I'll have some of those in the back of the room. And eventually we hope to develop a database that would, in fact, provide those kinds of, that kind of information to the field. I'll wind up real quickly here because we're about to run out of time, but a couple of things that I think are, Paul touched on, we've heard about earlier today. As it relates to the importance of being able to measure what you do. The realities are that if you can't demonstrate that a particular program or practice or product has an impact, and particularly a financial one, in this economic time, you're just not going to be able to sustain it. It will go away. So it's important that you begin to track utilities, track money generated, track inmate program hours that are involved in these programs, to make sure that you can demonstrate that. The other thing, Paul touched on it briefly, is the use of energy service companies, or ESCOs. Those programs are really help you eliminate, on the big ticket projects, they will help you eliminate the upfront cost to an agency. ESCOs will come in and they will, you can still acquire them through an RFP process, and ESCOs will come in and do the analysis for you, do the project, and you end up paying for the cost of the project with no additional appropriated dollars. You're actually paying for it out of the savings, and if an ESCO won't guarantee you that, find one that will. It's all about how you negotiate the contract. The other thing is it relates specifically to offender programming. Build the cost of a training program into the RFP. The best example I can give you, the Virginia Department of Corrections about 3 years ago switched a boiler in an old institution to a biomass boiler. They required in the RFP that the winner of the award of the contract had to also provide a training facility for inmates to win the award. So Johnson Controls got the contract. They built a $50,000 training facility that mimicked the actual plant, and put together a curriculum for inmates so that they could learn about this new equipment, how to maintain it, the theory behind it, et cetera, et cetera. And they actually got certificates from Johnson Controls upon completion of the training. The double bonus to that is much of these savings that these companies tout, particularly on things like HVAC and other things, is predicated on a perfect maintenance schedule, that you do all the preventive maintenance that you're supposed to do to keep that particular motor or HVAC system or whatever operating at peak performance. It's my experience in institutions that PM is one of the first things that suffers when money gets short, and so we don't change the filters every 30 days, we change them every 45, and then we change them every 60, and golly gee whiz, it's still working, let's push it off to quarterly. And what happens is, yeah, it still works, it still goes buzz and it still pushes air, but you've eliminated the efficiency of the technology because it's designed to be maintained at a certain level. So if you've got inmates who are trained in the maintenance of that, then you dramatically increase the probabilities that the equipment will work at its design capacity. Finally, one thing very quickly, we're sort of strong proponents of building networks and joining existing operations. One thing that got mentioned earlier today is the Let Us Grow organization. I really like that. I like what Sarah Patterson and her folks are doing because it takes advantage of resources that are already there by utilizing volunteers, horticulturalists, extension agents out in the community to bring programs in, so there's minimal cost for a facility. The other are, as I mentioned earlier in a comment back to one of the panelists, take advantage of existing professional associations. The North American Association of Wardens and Superintendents is a group that we've partnered with. They'll be in Ohio here in a couple of months, and we'll partner, Green Prisons will partner with Jenny and her folks, and we'll have an exhibit of what they're doing for this national audience at the NAS conference, and I'll have some material on them in the back. We have not taken